Welcome to Private Lending Insights. I'm your host, Rocky Batani. Our podcast is all about sharing valuable information about private mortgage lending, which is also known as hard money lending, bridge lending. It also includes long-term financing for residential investment properties and for multifamily properties as well. Our podcast primarily offers insights on loan origination, so it's applicable to real estate investors and mortgage brokers that are looking to learn about lending, loan programs, and particular lenders. However, in this episode, we're providing insights about licensing for brokering and lending in certain states throughout the country. In this episode, I interviewed Jennifer Young, an attorney with Gerasi LLP, also known as Gerasi Law Firm. Jennifer is an expert on licensing for private mortgage lenders. Many people assume that private mortgage lending doesn't require any licensing anywhere in the country because it's all commercial business purpose lending. However, there are states that do require licensing, and there are a few different nuances that you have to be aware of. So I asked Jennifer to explain this to us, and we break down some of the requirements for each of these different states. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and let's get started. All right, Jennifer, thanks for joining us for this episode of Private Lending Insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It is a little bit confusing, especially for business purpose lending. There's a lot of misconceptions that you don't need any licenses just because you're doing business purpose loans, but that's definitely not true. So happy to get into it.
Nice. And yeah, so we are talking about business purpose lending. It's commercial real estate, it's residential investment properties, it's all for investment purposes. So
That's right.
with that, what are the states around the country where a license is absolutely required for any type of mortgage origination business, whether it's business purpose or consumer purpose?
Consumer purpose, it's basically all the states, every single state. You definitely need to be licensed. Business purpose lending is a little bit more narrow in the number of states that you need. Depending on the collateral securing the loan, if it's, regardless of any collateral securing the loans, there are 6 states that you definitely need to be licensed in. That's California, Arizona, Nevada, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Vermont. On top of that, if you have a 1 to 4, you also need to be licensed in Utah, Oregon, Idaho, and Minnesota.
So those 4 states, they don't care if it's
5+ or commercial, you're
right.
good. But if it's 1
Okay.
to 4s, yeah, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, and Minnesota.
So 1 to 4 units residential properties,
Mhm.
even if it's business purpose, those 4 states, they still
Even if it's
require licensing.
right,
Okay.
even if it's business purpose. Hmm.
Okay. And with all of these states that you mentioned, so you've got a total of 10. With all of these states, does it matter whether it's a broker or a direct lender?
Yeah, so these are lending, right? As a broker, it's a little bit more nuanced, surprisingly. Certain states that don't require a license to lend do require you to have a broker's license if you want to broker in those states. Off the top of my head, New York, New Jersey, Michigan, I think Pennsylvania require you to have a license to broker, but they don't need you to have a lender's license if you're conducting business purpose loans.
But in the first states that you mentioned, so let's go back
Hmm.
to the 10 states that
Hmm.
require licensing for residential investment properties.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, you still need a license to broker in those states, right?
Yes, those are pretty much broker, lend, and servicing. You need some sort of licensing. And
Okay.
depending on your lending activity, you might have to expand it to other states. North Carolina is a weird one where you don't need a license, but you need to register with the Secretary of State if you're going to be brokering or lending. Servicing is a whole new different, evaluation that needs to be done. But for the most part, in those 10 states that I listed, you do need some sort of license to lend or broker.
Okay. Well, let's go through a few of them. So
Sure.
the Dakotas, it seems like not too many people are that excited about lending in the Dakotas or Vermont. And maybe there's other reasons besides the licensing requirements where there's just not much of a market there. It's not
Yeah.
worth it to do any kind of administrative, work with licensing where it's such a small market. Uh,
Yeah.
but let's go to the West Coast where a lot of people are excited about some of those markets. And let's start with California, the big one. So what are the licensing requirements to broker or to lend
Yeah,
with business purpose loans?
yeah, for California and generally for all these licensing states, when you're applying for a license, across the board, you're going to need background checks, FBI background checks. They most typically want to see a balance sheet. Different states have different balance sheet requirements, company minimum requirement amounts they want to see. Arizona needs to have audited financials. They definitely want to see a business plan and a surety bond placed. That's kind of generally across all states. California is probably the most difficult state right now to get licensed in. That CFL license, the California Finance Lenders License. It is taking 10 to 12 months to get approval. But the requirements aren't that difficult. They just want to see a 25,000 minimum on your balance sheet as a company net worth. They require a surety bond. They want to see a business plan. They want background checks, FBI background checks done, org chart, management chart, all that good stuff. But for the most part, it's not a difficult requirement state for licensing application purposes, but it is very long and very tedious, and the DFPI is not our favorite.
So the DFPI is the regulatory regime
Yep,
for the CFL license.
that's right.
Now
In
there's
California.
yeah, so now there's a Department of Real Estate, which is a different license, and that's mainly
Hmm.
for brokering, right?
Yeah. The DFPI oversees the CFL license. The Department of Real Estate, the DRE, oversees the California Real Estate Broker's license and a salesperson's license.
Okay.
Those are both licenses that you can get for business purpose lending if needed.
So let's go back to the CFL license. So if I'm a direct lender, I'm based in New York, I want to start lending in California. Do I need an office in California?
No, California is not one of the states that requires a brick and mortar. You can have your principal place of business in Texas, New York, wherever. Your entity, though, the lending entity that's applying for the license, it does need to have or be foreign registered in California.
Okay. And then are there uh, any exorbitant fees or taxes that lenders need to be aware of if they want to do business in California?
Yeah, so the foreign registration of the entity is required for pretty much every state that you're applying in. They want you to foreign register in that state, and that makes it so that in that state, you probably have to pay the annual SOI filings and keep your entity up to date. So there might be some state filing requirements. Taxes wise,
I guess
I'm not
taxes
really
is a whole
sure.
different topic. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not a tax attorney.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No,
Um,
that's okay.
and in California, it's just notorious for all entities that they have to pay this $800 a year or something, something to
So
that
that's
effect, right?
for, yeah, and that's for forming an entity in California, an LLC specifically. But if you're just foreign registering your entity in California, that's not the case.
Okay. All right. That's kind of a minor thing. So let's just say someone wants to make it happen. They want to be lending in California. They just need that CFL license if they're a balance sheet lender.
Hmm.
And then if they're going to be brokering, they have to have a DRE license, right?
They do. Well, CFL allows you to broker as well, but it prohibits you from brokering to an unlicensed CFL entity. So if you're going to be brokering using your CFL license, you have to broker to another CFL licensee. Whereas the DRE broker license, they'll allow you to broker to any unlicensed third parties, including CFLs unlicensed. So there's a little bit more flexibility on the DRE broker side for that.
So one situation that may come up is let's say I'm a lender based in Texas. I've got a CFL license. I've got a balance sheet. There's a loan that comes across that I don't really want to fund on my balance sheet, but it seems like a good deal. I want to broker it. I've got a buddy who runs a debt fund in California, so I can broker it to that fund because obviously they have a CFL license, and that would be okay, right?
Well, if that fund has its CFL license as well, then yes, you're good. But if the fund does not have a CFL license and you're using your CFL license to broker, you would not be able to do that. CFL licensing prohibits brokering to non-CFL lenders.
Okay, great. So just to recap, California, you just have to get that CFL license. It takes about 10 to 12 months.
Yeah,
You don't need a local office.
correct.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's move on to Nevada.
Yeah.
This is one state where hardly any private lender operates. I mean, any lenders that are outside of Nevada lend in Nevada because it's so tough with licensing. So tell us a little bit more about Nevada's licensing requirements.
Yeah, Nevada is kind of a larger hurdle when it comes to licensing. You'd be surprised though, activity has really picked up this year. Everybody has been, trying to get licensed in Nevada, but the hurdle is that Nevada requires a brick and mortar office, right? So you have to have a physical office located in Nevada. On top of that, you need a qualified employee to reside in Nevada that oversees that Nevada office. The qualified employee requirement is also kind of a hurdle. They have to be a Nevada MLO and show the requisite experience. I think it's 3 years over the past 5 years of MLO licensed experience. So it's been kind of a hurdle. Aside from the office location, Nevada doesn't require anything, specific on your balance sheet or a minimum company net worth. It's really just that office and the qualified employee that's been a hurdle for a lot of our clients.
So that that is challenging because essentially, if you want to set up shop in Nevada,
Hmm.
and you're a lender in some other state, fine, you've got a budget, you can set up a local office, but to go find some individual who's been a licensed mortgage loan originator in the state of Nevada for 3+ years, I mean that's something where you just have to be around there to recruit and really find someone who's qualified.
Yeah, and it's a little bit difficult in our space because a lot of the licensing states don't require you to have your MLO. And so, finding somebody with that 2 or 3 years of experience, active experience as a licensed MLO, has been a little bit difficult.
And just to clarify, the MLO is an NMLS license,
It's
right?
an NMLS, yeah, designation,
Endorsement.
mortgage,
Yeah,
yeah, endorsement. Hmm.
got it. Okay, all right. So Nevada, let's say there's a population of whatever it is, a little over 3 million. You've got to weigh um the cost and the effort to set up a local shop. Go find someone who's willing to be your employee in that state.
That's right.
But it can be done. Does it take a long time to get licensed once you have everything
Yeah.
else in place?
Yeah, I mean, finding that person, finding the office space is not that hard, right? But it's finding that person who has that requisite experience to show and having them be the designated qualified employee. It's a small process. It's not too difficult, but definitely finding that person has been a little bit of a challenge. I have some clients who have their Nevada license kind of on hold for 6 months, almost a year, until they found that person, and then we move forward. But
Uh,
it's
but
it's doable. It's doable.
but aside from finding the person, if you just want to apply for a license, how long does that typically take? Are we talking a month, 2 months, less?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think recently in the past at least 3, 5 months, we've been getting Nevada approved once all the qualifications and requirements are met. It's taken about 2 months or so to get that license.
Okay,
Yeah.
not bad.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to Arizona.
Yeah.
Tell us about if I want to lend in Arizona, what does it take?
So Arizona is just like Nevada, where it requires a brick and mortar. They are a little bit easier though because they don't have to have that qualified employee be unique to your company. So you can hire essentially somebody who has that license who can act as a responsible individual and sponsor them through your company while they are sponsored at the same time for other companies as well. And we do have a couple of referrals that we usually connect our clients with. They provide both the brick and mortar office space. So essentially, they put together kind of a lease for the company to use as the Arizona office. And then they act as the responsible individual on that Arizona license.
Interesting. So, contrary to Nevada, where it has to be an
Unique.
exclusive employee just for
Right.
your company, in
Right.
Arizona, it's essentially some broker who's allowing multiple lenders to use their
Hmm.
license and being responsible for those origination deals.
Yeah, so it's a lot easier on that front, but Arizona does require audited financials, and they want to see 100,000 as a company minimum net worth on those audited financials.
Okay. Another thing I didn't clarify earlier with California, Nevada, and now Arizona, I'm assuming it's similar in all states. But if let's say someone wanted to broker a loan for secured by a property that's located in one of these states, they're it sounds like they're not able to actually get paid because you have to be licensed in these states. Is that correct?
You do. Anytime you are conducting any type of brokering activity and you want to get paid a fee for it, you definitely need to consider licensing because brokering, talking to, the borrowers, collecting an application, negotiating loan terms, and then putting them together with the lender, that's brokering activities across all states, and you definitely need to be licensed to collect a broker fee.
So if I'm a broker out in Florida, I've got a good deal that I come across in Arizona or even Nevada, and I just want
Mhm.
to broker it to some lender that's licensed there. Essentially, I can't get paid, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah,
All
if
right.
it's an
Got it.
Arizona deal and you're not an Arizona broker, you can't get that Arizona fee, broker
Okay.
fee.
And is California the same?
Same.
They're just as strict, right?
Yep.
Okay.
They're very strict about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can only get paid as a broker if you have a Department of Real Estate license in California.
Right. Or a CFL broker, a CFL license, and you're
Correct.
brokering to another CFL licensee.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So Arizona, let's say I didn't want to use this person who's working with other lenders. I want to have my own broker. You essentially have to set up a brick and mortar shop, right? You need a physical office there,
Yeah.
and then you need
Yeah.
a
So if you don't want to use the referrals that we have available, you do have to set up your own office. I believe for Arizona, a residential address is okay, not for Nevada. Nevada requires a commercial address. Arizona, I think a residential address is okay, but you do have to have, a responsible individual who meets all those requirements to act as that person on the Arizona license overseeing that Arizona address.
okay, got it. All right, let's move on. We just have a few more states, and let's move on to the next state up north, which is going to be Oregon.
Okay.
What's the licensing requirements if I want to lend in Oregon?
Yeah, I love Oregon. Oregon is fast. It's a very easy application, and you only need the Oregon license if you are making loans secured by 1 to 4s. So 5+ commercial property, you're good to go in Oregon. Um, there's an exemption for licensing in Oregon where if you have a licensed broker to broker or arrange that deal, you don't need your Oregon license. But overall, Oregon is really easy. The application process is fast. It's pretty simple. Not a lot of back and forth with the regulators, and their requirements is a very short and easy list.
So if I'm a lender located, let's say, in Colorado, I want to
Mhm.
do a deal in Oregon. It was brought to me by a broker who's licensed in Oregon.
Yeah,
Then I don't need to worry about any licensing.
yeah.
Right.
If they arrange that loan for you and they're licensed in Oregon, then you can fund that loan.
So it's only if I wanted to do a deal directly with a real estate investor, with the borrower, where there's no broker involved, then
Yes.
so
Then you
some
need to,
essentially they want one person to be licensed.
yeah. Then you need to be licensed. That's right.
And what is the licensing regime? Is it NMLS or does Oregon have their own
The
separate licensing
Oregon
board?
Yeah, the Oregon, it's a mortgage entity license, and that is actually regulated by the Department of Real Estate, surprisingly, under Oregon.
Okay, got
Yeah.
it. Okay. All right. So just to recap, residential investment properties, you have to have someone has to be licensed, either the broker representing or the broker who's bringing the deal, or a direct lender who's going to work directly with the borrower.
That's right.
Okay.
And that license allows you to broker and lend. So once you get that license, you can do both.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So I can broker to another lender if it's a deal
Who's-
that I don't want to do
Yeah,
on my own balance sheet. Okay.
right. Yeah. Once you have
All
that
right.
license, you can broker to an unlicensed entity to lend if you don't want to
Okay.
make that deal.
Excellent. All right. Moving on. Let's go to Idaho. what are the requirements for licensing in Idaho?
Idaho has not been very difficult either. Idaho and Oregon have been pretty easy. Aside from background checks and surety bonds, it's a pretty easy process. The requirements are pretty minimal, standard. They want to know who the owners and the managers are, background checks for those people. But aside from that, it's a pretty straightforward process as well.
And is it similar to Oregon where uh, it could be a broker uh, or the lender that has the license, or do both? If there's a deal where a broker is representing the borrower, do they have to be licensed in Idaho as well?
Yeah, so Idaho also has the kind of a similar exemption as Oregon, where if it is a licensed broker who arranges or brokers that loan, you can fund that loan without being licensed in Idaho.
Okay, but brokering, I forgot to ask you about this for Oregon as well. I'm assuming it's similar, where if you're a broker located in another state, you really can't get paid if you're brokering a deal in one of these states.
Yeah, you can't collect that broker fee unless you have that broker's license.
Okay, got it. All right, and Oregon, I forgot to ask you, but I'll ask you with Idaho, and let's assume it's similar. You don't need a physical office,
Correct.
right? So out of
Yeah,
all
it's
these
only
states,
Arizona and Nevada that need the brick and mortar office.
okay, got it. All right, let's move on then to Utah. You said
Okay.
Utah is also another state where this only applies to residential investment properties up
One
to
to
4
fours.
units, right?
That's right. Hmm.
Okay, so what are the licensing requirements for Utah?
Utah has a little bit of a twist, right? They do require an individual. So these are all company licenses. When you apply for the license, it's for your company, for your entity. Utah does require an individual who is an employee of the company that has a principal lending manager license. So you have to have a lending manager license, and it's an individual license that the individual has to kind of sit for, take the test, do the hours, the requisite hours. And then once they get licensed, then you sponsor that individual as your Utah lending manager, and then you get the license for the company. But it is a requirement for the company license.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right, that sounds a bit painful. Uh,
It's not bad. I mean, you don't have to have an office in Utah. The person that's sitting for that exam or getting that license doesn't need to be located in Utah. They just have to show the requisite experience and pass the test.
okay, nice. All right, and then the last state that you mentioned that this only applies to residential investment properties is Minnesota.
Hmm.
So tell us more about the state of
Oh,
Minnesota.
yeah. Minnesota used to require a licensed MLO, even if you're doing business purpose loans. But Gerasi, my team, a couple years ago, we fought with the regulators, pushed back, and now they do not require a licensed MLO if you're doing business purpose loans. So part of the application process for Minnesota, the license, they want to make it very, very clear that you are only making business purpose loans. And once that's cleared, then they won't require you to attach an MLO individual to that license before approving it. They'll approve it without one.
But you still need the company to have a license
The company still
within the
needs a
state.
license. Yeah, this is for the company license.
Okay, and is there anything else to note about it? Is it fairly
No,
simple?
it's pretty simple. Yeah. All of
Okay,
the Oregon, Idaho, Utah, Minnesota, they're fairly straightforward. Aside from Utah's lending manager license requirement, these are pretty easy states and they move pretty fast.
okay, yeah, that doesn't sound so bad, at least for Minnesota.
Yeah.
Um, all right, great. All right, and just to finish off, why don't we just, uh, for the few people out there who might want to lend in the Dakotas and Vermont, why don't we cover those states? Um,
Uh,
let's start with Vermont, and then we'll come back to the Dakotas to finish
yeah,
it up.
Vermont is a little bit more of a tedious state. They do require they want to see a lot of your company internal policies and documents. But aside from that, it's pretty much like all the other licensing states, bonds, back fingerprints and background checks, org chart, management chart.
Okay, so you register the company in Vermont, and then it doesn't matter whether it's residential or commercial properties. They just want any lender that's doing business in Vermont to be
Right. It's
licensed there.
regardless of the property type. That's right.
Okay. Okay, got it. And how about let's start with North Dakota first.
North Dakota and South Dakota, they're pretty similar. They're fast, but like Vermont, they do want to see a lot of internal policies and procedures, a lot of written policies to be submitted along with the application. They haven't been too difficult. We've done both of those, and they've moved pretty fast. It's kind of on, the client to make sure that you have your internal documents together and be able to put a written policy, for the topics that they want to see covered.
Okay, great. With all of these states, whenever you handle licensing, is there a lot to do as far as renewals go?
Oh, yeah. So renewals kind of vary by state, right? California is pretty easy. They annually just require you to complete a CFL annual report. That's due every year in March 15th. But all the other states, and just kind of across the board for NMLS, if you have an NMLS account and you have a license in any of the states, October through December, the last 3 months of the year, they do kind of go through NMLS renewal periods where you're renewing and paying some NMLS fees for, having them house all of your information, all of your documents. And then certain states will have certain assessment fees, or they want to see audited financials every year for Arizona, for example. So it kind of depends on the state, but there are kind of minimal compliance requirements that are due every year for each license.
Okay. And as far as these audits, this is something I forgot to touch on earlier. I've heard that in Nevada they typically do annual audits. Is that something that's always done regardless every year, or is it kind of random?
Yeah, it's kind of random. It is a little bit more prevalent for Nevada, but it's not every single year without any, with no questions. It does kind of vary, and it's hard to say. Like the regulators are always hard to predict. Nevada is difficult, Arizona is a little bit difficult, and California is very difficult.
Okay. So audits are randomized. How about the other states that only require licensing for residential properties? Do you ever see audits from those states?
I have not seen any audits outside of Arizona, Nevada, and California. The other states, as long as every year you pay your NMLS fees, certain licensing fees, if they're due and on time, they usually kind of leave you alone.
Okay, excellent. All right, I think that takes care of it. So other than these 10 states that you mentioned, everywhere else in the United States, whether you're brokering or you're lending for business purpose loans, residential or commercial properties, you don't need any licensing.
Yeah, so let's be careful there because there are certain nuances there, right? So North Carolina, as I mentioned, it's not a license, it's a registration. Florida, you don't need a license if you're doing a 1 to 4. But, in the instance that you're doing commercial or 5 plus and the borrower is an individual, you do need a license.
Okay.
There's other states, owner occupied, or just a lot of exceptions, but nuances as well. Jurassic does provide these 50 state surveys. We have two versions. One is a kind of straightforward yes or no, which license, what type of lending activity, and do you need a license for that? And then a more nuanced survey where they kind of go through the statutes and then the evaluation of that statute to help you kind of determine whether or not you need to be licensed. It's the If you want to kind of just like think about it quick and dirty, it's those 10 states and North Carolina for any type of licensing, lending, brokering activities.
Okay. And then so other states, maybe we'll have people reach out to you to
Yeah.
find out whether they can lend to an individual or it has to be
hmm
an entity. And I'm
hmm
sure there's a bunch of other states that have uh, these little
Yeah.
nuances.
Borrower
But
type, property type. Yeah.
okay. All right. Well, we
And
can
lending
cover that.
activity, right? If you're only brokering, if you're thinking about servicing your own loans or servicing third party loans, these are all things that you have to consider and evaluate. So happy to help you guys, talk to your clients and figure out which licensing states to do.
Sure. And servicing is a whole nother topic. So why don't we save that for another episode? But this was a lot of great information you provided, just high level of which states, everyone has to watch out for if they're brokering or
Yeah.
lending with any sort of private lending and business purpose loans secured by real estate.
Yeah, and there are, certain exemptions and exceptions to licensing. So, happy to chat if you have a specific scenario or fact pattern, and I can talk you through that.
Excellent. Well, thanks for your time, Jennifer, and we'll have everyone reach out to you if they need help with licensing.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks for your
Thanks,
time.
Rocky. Take care.
Take care. So to quickly recap, the states that require licensing are California, Arizona, Nevada, North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont. These 6 states require a license regardless of whether it's residential property or commercial property. Now there's 4 states that require a license if it's residential investment property, and those states are Oregon, Idaho, Utah, and Minnesota. Mortgage licensing can be complicated, so use an expert, reach out to Jennifer Young. We'll put her contact information in the description. This episode is sponsored by Gerasi LLP, a law firm focused on private mortgage lending in the United States. Reach out to Gerasi for all of your legal needs, including licensing, litigation, securities, loan docs, and a lot more. Visit GerasiLLP.com to learn more. Reach out to them and tell them you heard about them from LenderLinks podcast, Private Lending Insights.